Hey guys, tonight we step through a wooden gate slick with dust and horse sweat, lantern light wobbling like tired eyelids, and fair warning, you probably won't survive this job for long. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time down in the comments, because while you're listening, somewhere it's already morning. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at a Han Dynasty Postal station just as dusk cools the road. The sun has flattened into a red coin behind low hills, and the air smells of trampled grass, manure, and boiled millet. You're on foot, which already puts you at a disadvantage. Everyone else here measures distance in horse lengths and heartbeats. A wooden sign creaks above the gate, its ink faded, but still sharp enough to warn you that this place belongs to the Empire, not to you. The first thing you notice is how quiet the busyness feels. Hooves thud somewhere out back. A clerk coughs, then clears his throat again like he's rehearsing obedience. A guard shifts his spear, the metal tip whispering against the ground. This is not an inn, no matter how much it resembles one from a distance. You're not here to relax. You're here because the Han state has decided messages must move faster than people, and you, lucky you, are part of the machinery. You step inside the gate and instinctively slow down, as if the space itself demands it. Postal stations, called yi, are placed at regular intervals along imperial roads, a mainstream historical fact that turns geography into infrastructure. They are spaced so a horse can run hard, arrive panting, swap riders or mounts, and keep going. The empire stretches because paper moves. Without these stations, the Han court in Chang'an would rule blind, shouting orders into the void and hoping someone hears them. A low building squats to your left, its roof tiles chipped, its walls patched with different shades of mud plaster. Straight ahead is an open yard churned into something between soil and soup. To the right, you glimpse a stable doorway, dark and breathing. You feel like you've walked into the chest cavity of something large and tired. Congratulations, you live inside it now. A senior clerk approaches, sandals whispering. He looks you up and down the way someone inspects a sack of grain, not unkindly, but without curiosity. You are recorded, that's what matters. Somewhere a bamboo slip or paper register will note that you arrived, when you arrived, and under whose authority. Historians still argue whether these records were always accurate or quietly massaged to protect careers, but standing here, you understand the fear behind the ink. A wrong number can ripple outward like a cracked bell. You hand over whatever token brought you here, an order, a seal, a verbal command passed down the road. The clerk nods once, already bored. He gestures you inside with a flick of his wrist, the ancient equivalent of "don't make this harder than it needs to be." You obey because the Han legal system is famously strict, and collective responsibility means your bunkmate could cost his back. As you walk, you register the rules without being told. Don't block the yard, don't touch the horses unless assigned, don't read sealed documents, even if curiosity is literally killing you. One light joke floats through your mind. If curiosity killed the cat, curiosity here gets you 50 strokes and a reassignment to somewhere worse. You swallow it. A cook passes carrying a pot that steams like a sigh. The smell makes your stomach wake up and complain loudly. Another joke. Congratulations, you've unlocked the millet-based diet plan. Results guaranteed, joy not included. You file that away for later because humor is how you'll survive the nights. You're shown where to set your bundle down. Straw mats line a wall, already claimed by other bodies that move as one organism when someone shifts. You haven't slept here yet, but you already know sleep will be shallow. Every sound means something. A hoofbeat could be routine or urgent. A shout could be nothing or everything. Someone mutters about a courier expected before full dark. Messages don't sleep. That's another mainstream fact you absorb. Imperial mail traveled day and night, prioritized above nearly all civilian movement. You imagine a document sealed with lacquer, carrying orders about grain taxes or troop movements, worth more than the lives of the men who carry it. You probably won't survive this job for long if you forget that hierarchy. A quirky tidbit drifts through station gossip. Some swear certain urgent dispatches were scented with musk or herbs so handlers could identify importance even in darkness. Historians still argue whether that's true or just a story born from long nights and bored mouths, but you inhale anyway, half expecting the air to whisper secrets. As twilight deepens, a bell rings once. It's not ceremonial, it's functional, like everything else here. Time is sliced into duties. You're assigned to watch the gate for a short stretch, not because you're trusted, but because warm bodies fill gaps. You lean on a post, feeling the wood worn smooth by generations of the equally temporary. Outside the gate, the road stretches pale under the moon. Somewhere out there, the empire is moving. You are a small, replaceable hinge, but without hinges, doors don't open. That thought is both comforting and terrifying. You settle into it, breathing in dust and smoke, listening to the station breathe around you, knowing this is only the beginning and already feeling how it will get under your skin. The gate watch ends without ceremony. No applause, no nod, just the quiet understanding that time has slid forward and taken you with it. You're waved inward again, deeper into the station's body, and you start to map the place, not with your eyes, but with your feet. Packed earth turns softer near the well. Stones click underfoot closer to the stables. You learn these textures fast because tripping here is not charming, it's suspicious. The postal station reveals itself in layers. From above, if you could float like a lazy cloud, it would look orderly. A rectangle of walls, buildings hugging the edges, an open courtyard in the middle like a lung. On the ground, though, it's all small adjustments. Doors never fully close. Roof beams sag just enough to drip when it rains. Every corner has been negotiated by generations of people who needed it to work, not to look good. You're shown the main courtyard properly now, not just as a dark shape you passed through earlier. It's wide enough for horses to turn at speed, churned into a permanent state of almost mud. This is intentional. Hard-packed earth reduces slipping, or so the station master claims, though historians still argue whether that was wisdom or just habit inherited from earlier road systems. Either way, you watch a groom lead a horse through it, muscles slick, nostrils flaring, and you understand why the ground looks wounded. To one side stands the administrative building. It's the neatest structure here, which tells you everything. Inside are desks, racks for documents, shelves for seals, and a faint smell of ink and old paper. You're not assigned there yet, but you peek through the doorway and feel the pressure of it. This room decides whether the station exists smoothly or becomes a cautionary tale read aloud at someone else's posting. One light joke flits through your mind. This is where joy goes to be audited. Behind that is the kitchen, smoky and loud in its own contained way. A hearth dominates the space, blackened from years of service. Pots hang like dull bells. The cook's helper chops something with a rhythm that suggests boredom rather than urgency. Food here is fuel, not art, but the layout matters. The kitchen sits close enough to the yard that meals can be handed off quickly, far enough that sparks don't threaten the stables. That balance is not accidental. It's the kind of practical geometry the Han state excelled at. The stables themselves are half the station's soul. You step inside and the smell hits you full in the face. Warm, sharp, alive. Rows of stalls line the walls, each marked with tally scratches and notes you don't yet understand. Mainstream history tells us these stations maintained fresh horses at all times, rotating them to avoid exhaustion, but seeing it makes the fact heavier. Each animal represents hours shaved off a message's journey, and years shaved off someone else's life if things go wrong. A quirky tidbit circulates among the grooms. Some swear the best relay horses recognize the sound of official bells and will start sweating before the rider even dismounts. Historians still argue whether animals can really be trained to anticipate bureaucratic urgency, but watching one stamp and snort as a courier approaches, you're willing to believe almost anything. Sleeping quarters cluster along the far wall, low-roofed and dim even in daylight. You count the mats again, already planning where you'll put your feet so you don't kick someone in the ribs at midnight. The layout enforces intimacy. Privacy is not a concept here, it's a luxury traded for efficiency. You remember modern open-plan offices and think, with gentle sarcasm, that at least no one here pretends this is good for morale. There's a small shrine tucked near the corner of the yard, almost apologetic in size. A rough wooden tablet bears characters invoking protection and smooth roads. It's placed where everyone passes but no one lingers. Religion here is folded into the architecture, not highlighted. You note it because you'll come back to it later, when the night stretches and rationality thins. Paths connect everything in the most direct way possible. No scenic routes, no wasted steps. If you stand still long enough, you see how people move along grooves worn into the earth, unconsciously optimizing. You start doing it too, adjusting your stride to avoid collisions, learning when to hug the wall and when to cut across the yard. The station trains you without asking. A senior worker explains, almost kindly, that the layout is standardized across the empire. This is another mainstream fact. Han postal stations followed general plans, so officials always knew what to expect. Historians still argue how rigid these standards were in practice, but standing here, you feel the comfort of repetition. If you were dropped into another station 100 li away, your body would recognize it before your mind did. As night settles fully, lanterns are lit in specific spots, enough to work, not enough to see trouble coming from far off. Shadows pool in familiar places. You realize the station is designed not to eliminate danger, but to manage it. Everything has a place because chaos wastes time, and time here is the one thing the Empire never has enough of. You finish the tour with the sense that you're no longer just passing through. The station's bones are under your skin now. You know where the drafts slip in, where the noise gathers, where mistakes are noticed. You lie down later with the layout still glowing behind your eyes, like a map you didn't ask for, but will need tomorrow. Morning doesn't arrive so much as it leaks in, pale light seeping through door cracks and roof seams, pulling you out of sleep whether you agreed to it or not. You roll off your straw mat with the stiff grace of someone who has learned overnight that comfort is optional. Around you, bodies untangle, cough, stretch, and mutter. No one says good morning. The station has already decided what kind of day it will be. You start to learn who works here, not by introductions, but by patterns. The clerk you saw last night is already upright, brush in hand, coaxing order onto a bamboo slip. He is lean, careful, and keeps his voice low, as if volume itself might be recorded against him. Clerks are the station's memory. A mainstream historical fact you absorb quickly is that literacy, even basic, gives them power far beyond their muscle. They don't run, they don't lift, but everything waits on their marks. The grooms come next, sleeves rolled, faces already damp. They move with familiarity around the horses, checking hooves, rubbing down flanks, murmuring nonsense sounds that calm both animal and man. Many of them are here because they were born into obligation. Postal labor could be hereditary or assigned as part of a corvée system, binding families to state service for generations. Historians still argue how much choice these workers truly had, but watching a groom cradle a horse's head with genuine care, you see pride tangled with resignation. Guards lean against walls, spears upright, eyes half-lidded but alert in that unnerving way. Some are retired soldiers, others young men waiting for something better. Their job is mostly presence. Trouble is rarer than fear, but when it comes fast. One guard jokes, quietly, that the spear is really there to remind them not to nap. That's joke number one of the day, and it lands with a few tired smiles. Cooks and helpers bustle near the hearth. You notice most are older or female, their labor folded into the background. Food appears as if by magic, but you're beginning to understand how much work vanishes that way. A pot of millet porridge simmers, stirred by someone who will never sign a document. Status here is not subtle, it's baked into who speaks and who doesn't. You find yourself assigned small tasks, fetch water, carry bundles, sweep a corner that will immediately be dirty again. This is how you're tested, not for skill, but for obedience and speed. Someone watches without looking like they're watching. If you're slow, you'll be corrected. If you're fast, you'll be given more to do. Welcome to the Han Dynasty version of career development. A quirky tidbit circulates as you work. Some stations reportedly kept trained dogs to carry small messages between nearby relays when roads flooded. Historians still argue whether that actually happened or if it's a folk embellishment. But you imagine a dog trotting earnestly down a muddy road with imperial business tied to its back and have to suppress a laugh. You begin to see why each person is here. Debt is one reason, punishment is another. Some were reassigned from other posts after minor infractions, nothing dramatic, just enough to land them somewhere dull and watched. A few, rarer than you'd think, volunteered. The Postal Service offered stable rations and a clear role in the empire's workings. For someone tired of farming uncertainty, this was a kind of security. Hierarchy governs everything. The station master is almost invisible, which tells you he's powerful. When he does appear, people straighten without thinking. His authority comes directly from the state, and he carries it like a weight balanced perfectly on his shoulders. Historians still argue how much autonomy station masters had, but you sense the truth is situational. Too much independence invites suspicion, too little invites failure. You speak little, listen more. Names are exchanged sparingly. Here, identity matters less than function. You are a pair of hands until proven otherwise. You start to mirror the rhythms around you. Work fast, rest briefly, don't ask unnecessary questions. Second joke of the day floats through your head. This place would make a great reality show if reality shows were about paperwork and chronic exhaustion. By midday, sweat slicks your back, and you realize everyone smells the same: smoke, animals, and human effort. It's oddly comforting. Shared discomfort flattens difference. For a moment, you feel almost like you belong. As afternoon shadows lengthen, you watch a new courier arrive. Everyone pivots instantly. Grooms move, clerks prepare, guards focus. This is why you're all here. The people are components, but they're also witnesses to the empire in motion. Messages pass through your hands like ghosts, leaving only the pressure behind. You end the day understanding something fundamental. This station runs not on loyalty, but on interdependence enforced by law. Each worker's survival is knotted to the others. Historians still argue whether that bred cooperation or quiet resentment, but as you lie down again, muscles aching, you suspect the answer is both. You close your eyes, knowing tomorrow will look much the same, and that sameness is the point. The rhythm of the station sharpens the moment imperial mail arrives. You feel it before you see it. like a tightening in the air. Hooves drum hard outside the gate, too fast for leisure, too controlled for panic. A bell rings, twice this time, and every loose movement snaps into purpose. You step aside automatically now. You've learned where you're allowed to exist when importance passes through. The courier rides in hunched and dust-streaked, his horse lathered, sides heaving. The animal skids slightly in the yard, catching itself on the forgiving mud you noticed yesterday. Grooms are already there, hands out, voices low and urgent. The rider swings down and doesn't stretch, doesn't look around. His eyes are on the clerk waiting by the administrative door, brush poised like a weapon. This is imperial mail, and it is the reason this place exists at all. A mainstream historical fact pulses under the scene. The Han Dynasty maintained one of the most extensive courier networks of the ancient world, allowing orders to travel hundreds of miles in days rather than weeks. You watch that abstraction become real as a sealed packet changes hands without ceremony, its importance measured not by decoration, but by the speed demanded of it. You're close enough to see the seal, thick, dark, impressed with authority. You do not lean in. Everyone knows the rules. Reading or tampering with official correspondence is not just illegal, it's existentially unwise. Punishments ripple outward, and collective responsibility means even proximity can be dangerous. You keep your eyes respectfully blank. The clerk checks the seal, notes the arrival time, and marks the register. His brush moves fast but precise. This moment, ink touching surface, is as critical as the gallop that preceded it. Historians still argue whether timing records were always honest or adjusted to protect stations from blame, but here, now, the numbers feel sacred. A delay can mean grain ships launched too late, troops moved too slowly, rebellions missed until they're no longer whispers. The courier drinks water, barely breathing between swallows. His horse is led away, already being rubbed down, checked for injuries, swapped out. Relay riders rarely travel long distances themselves. They are links, not chains. Another mainstream fact settles in your mind. Speed came from fresh horses and fresh men, not heroic endurance. The Empire values replacement over valor. Someone mutters that this packet came from the west, that it's been moving day and night. A light joke flickers through the yard. If the document can talk, it would beg for rest. No one laughs loudly. Humor here is like steam venting from a pot, quick and controlled. A quirky tidbit you've heard comes back to you now. Some sources claim urgent messages were written on thinner paper or silk to reduce weight, shaved grams turning into minutes over long distances. Historians still argue how much that mattered in practice, but watching the care taken with even small efficiencies, you believe the mindset, if not the math. The outgoing rider is almost ready before the incoming one has stepped aside. The packet is transferred, seal checked again, and suddenly it's gone, swallowed by the road beyond the gate. The whole exchange takes minutes. The yard exhales. People return to half-finished tasks as if nothing monumental just occurred. This is perhaps the strangest part. The Empire moves through you, and you're expected not to stare. Later, as the adrenaline fades, you help tidy the traces, swept mud, wiped troughs, reset ledgers. The station's job is not just to accelerate messages, but to erase the evidence of their passing. Efficiency includes invisibility. You realize this is why travelers' stories sound exaggerated. The system itself leaves so little behind. Over a simple meal, someone speculates about the packet's contents. Grain quotas, court intrigue, border trouble? You listen without contributing. Historians still argue how much postal workers knew about the messages they handled, but you sense that ignorance here is a survival strategy. Knowing too much gives worry somewhere to land. As dusk approaches again, another courier is expected, and another after that. Imperial mail doesn't come in neat batches. It arrives in pulses, following crises, seasons, and the moods of distant officials. You start to understand that urgency here is not emotional, it's procedural. The station doesn't care why something matters, only that it does. Standing near the gate, you feel a faint thrill despite yourself. You are close to the bloodstream of power.
Orders, warnings, reassurances, they all pass through this narrow throat. You're not important, but you're adjacent to importance, and that adjacency hums. As night settles, you realize something unsettling. The faster the messages move, the less time anyone has to think about them. The Empire runs on momentum as much as wisdom. You lean against the wall, listening for hooves in the dark, knowing the next arrival could change lives far away, and all you'll feel is the wind of it rushing past. You spend more time with the horses now, whether you meant to or not. Once the novelty of imperial mail fades, the station's true pulse reveals itself in warm flanks and restless hooves. If messages are the blood, horses are the heart, and this heart is constantly pushed, soothed, and pushed again. You learn quickly that everything here bends around their limits. Morning grooming becomes a ritual. You run your hands along a neck slick with sweat and dust, feeling muscle jump under your fingers. The animals are not uniform. Some are lean and nervous, others thick and stubborn. Each has a tally mark, a name you're not supposed to use out loud, and a rotation schedule that determines how hard it can be run. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Han postal regulations specified how far a horse could be ridden before replacement, often around 30 to 40 li, to prevent collapse. The rules exist because broken horses mean broken communication. You watch grooms argue softly about which animal is fit for the next relay. It's not sentimentality, it's math mixed with experience. One horse might look fine, but ran hard yesterday. Another has a slight limp no one officially notices. Historians still argue how strictly these regulations were enforced across the empire, but here, enforcement feels personal. A misjudgment shows up as blood in the nostrils or a rider stranded between stations. The work is physical and intimate. You scoop dung, brush coats, carry water buckets that slosh cold against your legs. This is where you pick up the station's unfiltered truths. Horses don't care about seals or titles. They respond to touch, voice, and pain. You joke quietly to yourself, third joke of the day, that if the empire were run by horses, at least the meetings would be shorter. A quirky tidbit circulates among the stable hands. Some relay horses were fed small amounts of fermented grain to keep them energized and calm. Historians still argue whether this was practical nutrition or a superstition borrowed from military camps, but you can smell the sour sweetness on certain feeds and wonder what effect it really had. Exhaustion is everywhere. You see it in the animal's eyes and feel it creeping into your own bones. Relay work demands bursts of speed, followed by enforced rest, but the rest never quite resets you. Horses are swapped, but humans linger. Grooms sleep in snatches, waking at every bell. Riders arrive already hollowed out by the road. You witness a horse come in wrong. The courier dismounts too stiffly, and the animal's breathing is ragged. The yard tightens around the scene. No shouting, just fast, efficient movements. The horse is walked, not stalled. Water is offered carefully. Someone checks the gums. This is triage, ancient style. You realize how thin the margin is between success and disaster. Mainstream history tells us that postal horses were state property, carefully accounted for. Killing or stealing one carried severe penalties. That knowledge hovers as the grooms work. Care is not kindness here, it's compliance. Still, when the horse finally settles, a groom exhales like he's been holding his breath for years. You see the human cost of treating living beings as infrastructure. By afternoon, you're sore in new places. You learn how to lift without hurting yourself, how to read an animal's mood from ear angle alone. These skills are not written down. They pass hand to hand, whispered between chores. Historians still argue how much institutional knowledge was lost when stations closed or abandoned, and you suspect most of it lived in muscles, not texts. There's a strange bond that forms in the stables. Humans and animals share the same rhythms of work and rest, both subject to bells and orders. You lean against a post and feel a horse nudge you, searching for salt. You laugh softly. In this moment, empire feels very far away. As evening approaches, the smell of the stables clings to you no matter how much you rinse your hands. It follows you to the sleeping quarters, a reminder that speed always leaves residue. You lie down listening to the muffled sounds of hooves shifting in the dark, and you understand something deeply. The empire moves because bodies are spent, animal and human alike. And tomorrow, the heart will be asked to beat just as hard again. Hunger becomes a background hum you stop noticing until it spikes. Meals at the station don't announce themselves with joy. They simply happen when they must, folded into the workday like another task on the ledger. By now, your body has learned the schedule, even if your mind still rebels against it. You line up with everyone else, bowls in hand, steam rising into the morning air. The food is simple, repetitive, and designed to keep you upright rather than happy. Millet porridge dominates, thick enough to coat your spoon and your patience. A mainstream historical fact anchors this routine. Millet was the staple grain of northern Han China, cheap, durable, and easy to store, making it ideal for institutions like postal stations that fed many mouths with minimal fuss. Vegetables appear when they can, boiled greens, radish slices, sometimes beans. Meat is rare enough to be commented on when it happens. When a sliver of pork floats in your bowl one evening, someone jokes that an official somewhere must be celebrating. That's joke number 1 for this section, and it earns a few dry chuckles. You eat carefully anyway. Food here is communal, and scarcity sharpens eyes. Fire governs everything in the kitchen. The hearth is never truly cold, just banked and coaxed. You watch the cook manage it with the same attention grooms give horses. Too hot wastes fuel. Too cool delays meals. Historians still argue how centrally fuel supplies were regulated, but standing near the hearth, you understand that firewood is as strategic as grain. No fire, no food. No food, no work. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you help carry water. Some stations reportedly flavored porridge with medicinal herbs believed to prevent fatigue or ward off illness. Historians still argue whether this had any real effect or simply made bland food tolerable. But you notice a faint bitterness in today's bowl and decide you're healthier already. Hierarchy shows even at meals. Clerks eat first, then guards, then everyone else. It's not written anywhere you can see, but everyone knows it. You learn where to stand so you're not in the way, how to accept a bowl without meeting eyes, how to finish quickly and move on. Lingering suggests leisure, and leisure suggests you're not needed. The kitchen is one of the few places gossip flows freely. While stirring, chopping, and washing, people talk, quietly, about weather, travelers, rumors from other stations. You hear about a flood 2 relays east, about a station master demoted for missing a dispatch window. These stories carry warning more than entertainment. Eat fast, listen faster. You take your bowl outside one evening and sit on a low step, steam curling into the dusk. The food is hot, and for a moment, that's enough. You joke to yourself, joke number 2, that modern meal prep has nothing on ancient bulk cooking when it comes to soul-crushing efficiency. Still, the warmth settles your stomach and steadies your hands. Rations are counted. You see it happen. A clerk marks consumption against expected numbers. Too much, and questions arise. Too little, and someone worries food is being diverted. Historians still argue how often theft occurred in these stations, but the system assumes temptation is constant. Trust is replaced by arithmetic. Sometimes travelers bring gifts, dried fruit, a sack of better grain, a skin of wine, offered quietly to ensure smooth treatment. These don't go straight to the pot. They disappear into back rooms, reappearing later as favors or quiet feasts for those at the top. You notice, file it away, and keep your mouth full. By night, your body craves more than it gets. You lie on your mat with the faint ache of hunger sharpening your senses. Food here is not about pleasure, it's about continuity. The station eats so it can keep functioning, just as horses rest so they can run again. As sleep edges closer, you realize that meals are another way the Empire reminds you who you are. Fed but never indulged, sustained but never satisfied. The last taste of millet lingers as you drift off, and you already know what tomorrow will bring, because it always does. Sleep, when it comes, is thin and conditional. You don't fall into it so much as hover near it, one ear always tuned for bells or footsteps. The sleeping quarters smell of straw, sweat, and the faint tang of horse that never quite leaves your clothes. Bodies line up along the wall like stored tools, each one temporarily powered down. You learn quickly where not to sleep. Too close to the door and every late arrival shakes you awake. Too far inside and the air grows stale, heavy with breathing. You pick a middle spot, strategic, like everything else here. A mainstream historical fact presses into this moment. Postal stations operated around the clock, which meant staggered duty rotations and constant partial exhaustion. Full rest is a luxury the system doesn't budget for. Night duty is assigned without discussion. Names are called softly, and people rise, rubbing eyes, pulling on layers. Tonight, you're on for a short watch near the yard. Not guarding exactly, observing, making sure nothing moves that shouldn't. You step outside and the cool air snaps you more awake than sleep ever did. The station at night is a different creature. Lantern light pools on the ground, leaving the edges in thick shadow. Horses shift in their stalls, hooves scraping softly like they're dreaming of running. Somewhere, water drips with maddening regularity. You count the drops without meaning to. Duty rotations blur the hours. You're awake when your body expects sleep, asleep when it expects work. Historians still argue how this affected long-term health among station workers, but you don't need a scroll to tell you it wears people down. You see it in the way older hands move, conserving effort like a precious resource. Someone tells a story quietly to stay awake, a memory of another station, another road. Not quite a ghost story, not quite history, just enough narrative to keep eyelids from winning. You offer a weak joke, number one for this section, about how insomnia is just patriotism expressed at night. It earns a snort and nothing more. When your watch ends, you slip back inside, careful not to step on fingers or feet. Sleep comes in chunks. You dream of bells ringing with no one there to answer them. You wake disoriented, heart racing, then remember where you are. Relief fades into resignation. Morning arrives again, announced by movement rather than light. Someone stumbles over you, someone else coughs like they're trying to expel the night. You sit up slowly, joints protesting. The straw mat has imprinted itself into your skin. You joke to yourself, joke number two, that this is what luxury memory foam looks like in the Han Dynasty. The lack of privacy grates in small ways. There is no space to be alone with your thoughts. Even silence is shared. You learn to think quietly, to tuck feelings away until they dull. Historians still argue whether communal sleeping fostered camaraderie or resentment, but lying shoulder to shoulder with strangers, you suspect it did both, depending on the night. Duty calls again before you feel ready. It always will. You splash water on your face, the cold biting, and straighten your clothes. Someone younger than you looks worse, eyes red, hands shaking slightly. You don't comment. Compassion here is mostly silent. By the time you're fully awake, you realize something has shifted. The exhaustion hasn't broken you, it's reshaped you. You move more efficiently, waste fewer gestures. The station is teaching you its tempo, sanding off excess. As you step back into the yard, sun climbing, You understand that sleep here isn't meant to restore. It's meant to sustain just enough function to keep the road alive. You accept that, because acceptance is lighter than resistance, and you've learned to conserve energy wherever you can. You start to notice the edges of fear before you ever see danger itself. It lives in the way conversations drop when an unfamiliar sound carries from the road, in how guards straighten a fraction too fast when dusk stretches long. The station looks solid in daylight, but you're learning that its confidence thins with the light. Bandits are the unspoken presence. They're rarely mentioned directly, as if naming them might invite them closer. Mainstream history confirms they were a constant threat along imperial roads, especially in times of famine or unrest, and postal stations were tempting targets: horses, food, sometimes valuables passing through. Yet here, the danger feels abstract, like weather. You prepare for it without expecting to see it. Security is layered, not dramatic. There are walls, yes, but they're not fortress thick. Gates are sturdy but practical, designed to open quickly for couriers, not hold off sieges. Guards rotate positions more to stay awake than to outmaneuver attackers. Historians still argue whether postal stations were meant to resist serious assaults or simply delay them long enough for help to arrive. Standing here, you suspect delay was the real strategy. You're assigned to help check the perimeter one evening, walking the inside of the wall with a guard whose name you still don't know. He points out weak spots casually: an old repair, a section where rain undermined the base. This is knowledge passed quietly, not written down. Fixing everything would take resources no one has. Instead, you memorize vulnerabilities and hope no one else does. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you walk. Some stations allegedly kept spare spears or crossbows hidden rather than displayed, so attackers wouldn't know their true defenses. Historians still argue how widespread that practice was, but you glance at shadowed corners with new interest, imagining weapons tucked just out of sight. The fear sharpens at night. Sounds carry farther. A fox barking on a distant ridge sends a ripple through the yard before anyone laughs it off. Joke number 1 slips out. Someone mutters that even the animals are trying to steal imperial secrets. It breaks the tension just enough. Corruption adds another layer of unease. You've heard whispers about guards paid to look the other way, about stations that quietly cooperated with local bandits to avoid destruction. Historians still argue how common this was, but you see the possibility in every human exchange. Trust here is conditional, built on necessity rather than belief. One night, a delayed courier doesn't arrive when expected. The station tightens. Lamps are adjusted. Guards take positions they don't usually bother with. You feel your pulse in your ears, aware that if trouble comes, you're not trained for heroics. You're trained to follow orders, which may or may not save you. Hours pass. Eventually, the courier limps in alone, horse spooked but alive. No bandits, just a fallen tree and bad footing. Relief spreads quietly, like warmth returning to numbed fingers. Joke number 2 surfaces. The empire defeated once again by landscaping. It earns a breathy laugh. Afterward, you realize how thin the line is between routine and disaster. Security here is less about stopping threats and more about enduring uncertainty. You go back to your mat that night with muscles tight, mind replaying every sound. By morning, the fear recedes, replaced by work. That's how it survives. Never constant enough to paralyze, never absent enough to forget. You carry it with you as you sweep, feed horses, mark time. The station stands, for now, and so do you, alert to shadows and grateful for daylight. You think you understand fear until you meet paperwork. Not the abstract idea of records, but the real thing. Bamboo slips stacked like quiet threats, brushes that never quite dry, numbers that refuse to stay put. The administrative room hums with a tension different from the yards. Out there, mistakes bruise bodies. In here, they echo. You're called in to help tally supplies, A task that sounds harmless until you feel the weight of it. Every horse, every sack of grain, every bundle of firewood exists twice, once in the physical world and once on a register. The two must match. A mainstream historical fact settles in as you watch the clerk work. Han bureaucracy was famously meticulous, relying on detailed written records to enforce accountability across vast distances. The empire trusts ink more than memory. You're shown how to count without counting. You don't dump grain, you measure by container. You don't recount horses, you verify marks. Efficiency here is about reducing opportunities for error. Even so, errors happen. A number smudges, a slip cracks, someone coughs at the wrong moment. You feel sweat gather at your spine as you copy figures, knowing that neatness is not just aesthetic, it's defensive. Punishment lurks behind every line. Missed tallies can mean flogging, demotion, or worse. And punishment is rarely individual. Collective responsibility means if one person fails, everyone attached to the task feels it. Historians still argue whether this system improved accuracy or simply spread fear, but standing here, brush shaking slightly, you suspect fear does most of the work. A quirky tidbit passes through whispered conversation. Some clerks allegedly kept personal shadow tallies, private notes to cross-check official numbers in case of audits. Historians still argue whether this was prudent diligence or quiet rebellion, but you glance at the clerk's sleeve and wonder what's hidden there. You learn the rhythms of paperwork. Morning tallies, midday updates, evening confirmations. Each step builds on the last. There's no room for heroics here. Speed is less valued than consistency. You joke softly, joke number one, that the fastest thing in the empire is actually a brush moving sideways to fix a mistake. No one laughs, but the clerk's mouth twitches. As the day drags on, you notice how paperwork shapes behavior outside the room. Grooms double-check feed, guards log patrols they barely remember, cooks measure rations with exaggerated care. The records reach into every task, invisible strings pulling people into alignment. Historians still argue whether such bureaucracy stifled initiative, but from here it feels like a net, restrictive, yes, but also holding everything together. You make your first small error just before dusk, a mark in the wrong column. It's caught quickly, corrected quietly, but the moment stretches long in your chest. The clerk looks at you, not angry, just tired. He doesn't scold. He doesn't need to. The system has already spoken. Later, over a thin meal, someone tells a story about a station where repeated tally errors led to a full investigation. People were reassigned, some never seen again. Whether the story is true doesn't matter. Its function is clear. Joke number two bubbles up in your mind. Nothing motivates accuracy like vague but terrifying anecdotes. By night, the paperwork is done, but it doesn't leave you. You lie awake replaying numbers, worried you forgot something. You realize this is how control works best, when it continues inside you, even after the lamps are out. In the morning, you'll pick up the brush again, steadier now, more careful. You're learning that survival here depends as much on clean columns as strong backs. The empire runs on fear sharpened into precision, and you are slowly being shaped to fit the margins. Travelers pass through the station like weather systems, brief, influential, and gone before you fully understand them. By now, you can tell who belongs and who doesn't within seconds. Locals move with the station's rhythm. Travelers arrive offbeat, carrying the dust and urgency of elsewhere. An official arrives mid-morning, robes cleaner than they should be for the road. The yard subtly rearranges itself around him. Guards stand straighter, clerks move faster. You step aside without being told. A mainstream historical fact surfaces here. Postal stations were obligated to provide lodging, food, and fresh horses to officials on state business, regardless of the station's own strain. Authority travels light, obligation does not. The official barely looks at you. His attention is on seals, on his own timeline. He complains, softly but pointedly, about the quality of the road, the delay at the last station. The station master bows just enough. Everyone absorbs the criticism like a bruise. Historians still argue how much power traveling officials wielded in practice, but you see it in action. A few words can rearrange weeks of someone else's life. Soldiers come through too, usually in small groups. They're louder, more curious, asking questions they don't expect answers to. They smell of leather and iron, and they eye the horses with professional interest. One jokes, joke number 1 for this section, that if he could requisition a relay horse, he'd be home by tomorrow. No one laughs. Requisition is not a funny word here. Messengers are different. They arrive already half gone, eyes fixed on what comes next. You admire and pity them in equal measure. Their world is measured in distances you don't walk. A quirky tidbit you've heard resurfaces. Some messengers supposedly slept in their saddles during short stops, trained to wake at the sound of bells. Historians still argue whether that level of conditioning was real or romanticized, but watching one slump against a wall, eyes closing instantly, you believe the spirit of it. Travelers bring news whether they mean to or not. Snippets of border trouble, rumors of court intrigue, prices rising somewhere far away. These fragments scatter through the station, reshaping conversations. You realize this place is not just a conduit for official information, it's a sieve for unofficial truth. Some travelers bring trouble. A merchant tries to argue for extra food, flashing a coin. He's turned away gently but firmly. This is not a market. Bribes here are risky, their consequences unpredictable. Historians still argue how often postal stations bend rules for civilians, but you sense the line is sharp for a reason. Blurring it invites scrutiny. By evening, the travelers are gone, leaving only impressions. The yard feels emptier, quieter, like a room after guests leave. You notice how their brief presence disrupted routines, stretched supplies, frayed tempers. The station absorbs it all and resets. You lie down that night thinking about how many worlds brushed past you today. Each traveler carried a different version of the empire, and none of them stayed long enough to be corrected. You realize that while messages move fast, understanding moves slowly, carried by people who pause just long enough to be noticed, then disappear down the road. Weather becomes your most unreliable coworker. It never follows orders, never respects schedules, and yet everything here bends around it. You wake to the sound of rain one morning, a steady drumming on tile and earth that seeps into your bones before your eyes even open. The yard will be mud again, thicker this time, and the road beyond worse. Rain turns efficiency into negotiation. Horses slip more easily, wheels sink, couriers arrive splattered, tempers short. A mainstream historical fact asserts itself through the downpour. Despite the sophistication of the Han road network, travel was still at the mercy of seasonal weather, with floods and mud significantly slowing communication. You watch a groom test the ground with his boot and adjust plans accordingly. Heat brings its own problems. On hot days, the air hangs heavy, buzzing with insects. Sweat stings your eyes, and water disappears faster than it's hauled. You learn to spot the signs of heat exhaustion in horses and people alike: glassy eyes, sluggish movement. Historians still argue how well ancient states understood heat stress, but here, practical knowledge fills the gaps left by theory. Winter is worse, they say. Ice on the road, numb fingers, stiff joints. You haven't seen it yet, but the stories are vivid enough. Someone jokes, joke number 1, that at least bandits stay home when it's freezing. Someone else counters that desperation doesn't feel cold the same way. The joke dies quietly. The station adapts constantly. Lanterns are repositioned in fog. Roof leaks are caught with bowls. Work schedules shift subtly with daylight. This flexibility isn't written anywhere, but it's essential. Historians still argue whether central authorities accounted for local conditions in their expectations, but standing ankle-deep in mud, you suspect most adjustments were unofficial. A quirky tidbit circulates during a storm. Some stations allegedly burned specific woods believed to calm horses during thunder. Historians still argue whether that was superstition or coincidence, but the grooms do it anyway, and the horses seem no worse for it. Delays ripple outward. A courier arrives late, apologetic, soaked. The clerk notes the time with a tight mouth. The reason will be written, but whether it will be believed is another matter. Weather is an excuse everyone uses, which makes it suspect. You feel the tension between lived reality and bureaucratic expectation stretch taut. By afternoon, the rain eases, leaving the yard transformed. Ruts mark every path. You help smooth what you can, knowing it's temporary. Tomorrow's weather will undo it. This futility is oddly calming. Some problems are allowed to persist. As night falls, mist curls low, muffling sound. The station feels smaller, closer. You stand watch, listening to rain drip from eaves, and realize how much of your energy goes into compensating for forces you can't control. The empire may command people, but it negotiates with nature. You sleep that night with rain still tapping, dreams thick and slow. Weather will shape tomorrow too, whether anyone records it or not. And you, like everyone here, will adjust and carry on, because the road never truly waits.
You begin to notice patterns in who is seen and who isn't. Not officially, no one announces it, but through repetition. Certain people glide through the station almost invisible, their work absorbed into the background like smoke. Others take up space without trying. Status here is not shouted, it's assumed. Gender shapes labor quietly. Women work in the kitchen, haul water, mend clothing, clean sleeping mats. They rarely handle horses or paperwork, not because they can't, but because the station has already decided where they belong. A mainstream historical fact settles in. While Han law recognized women as legal persons, state labor systems overwhelmingly assigned them to domestic or support roles, even within institutional settings like postal stations. You watch a woman kneel by the hearth long after dark, coaxing heat from embers everyone else has forgotten. No one thanks her. Tomorrow, the fire will simply be there. Historians still argue how much women's labor was officially recorded versus silently assumed, but here, absence from the ledger feels like its own form of erasure. Status cuts across gender too. Clerks, even junior ones, move differently. Their backs are straighter, their hands cleaner. Guards carry weapons and therefore a kind of authority that doesn't require literacy. Grooms sit somewhere in between, physically essential, socially limited. You learn where you fall by how people speak to you, or don't. A quirky tidbit circulates during a slow afternoon. Some Han legal cases mention women petitioning officials at postal stations using them as access points to imperial authority. Historians still argue how common this was, but the idea lingers with you. Even here, in a place designed for speed, people sometimes stopped long enough to ask for justice. You notice how rules bend depending on who breaks them. A clerk's mistake is corrected quietly. A groom's mistake earns a public reprimand. A kitchen helper's error might not even be named, just fixed by someone else. This unevenness is not accidental. It reinforces hierarchy without speeches. One evening, you help carry water with someone who never speaks unless spoken to. She moves efficiently, eyes down, aware of everyone's path. You offer a small joke, joke number 1 for this section, about how the buckets feel heavier every trip. She smiles, quick and tired, then looks away. Connection here is brief and careful. Historians still argue whether such rigid divisions reduced conflict or deepened resentment. From where you stand, it does both. The station runs smoothly because everyone knows their place. It also hums with unspoken tension, a low note that never resolves. At night, when work slows, you see flashes of individuality. Someone humming, someone rubbing sore wrists, someone staring at the road as if imagining another life. These moments don't last. Dawn resets the roles. You lie down thinking about how much effort goes into staying unnoticed. Survival here is not about rising, it's about fitting so perfectly into expectation that the system forgets to grind you down. Sleep comes with that thought heavy in your chest, and you drift off knowing the invisible work will begin again before you're ready. Illness announces itself quietly here. A cough that lingers too long, a limp that doesn't fade by morning. No one dramatizes it. Drama implies time, and time is rationed more tightly than food. You notice the signs because you've learned to watch bodies the way the station does, looking for failure points before they break everything else. There is no physician attached to the station. That's the first hard truth. A mainstream historical fact settles in as you watch someone press a cloth to a swollen wrist. Most Han postal stations relied on basic medical knowledge, folk remedies, and whatever traveling healers happened to pass through. Health is managed, not cured. A small box of supplies sits in the corner of the administrative room. Dried herbs, cloth strips, a chipped cup for mixing things that smells sharp and bitter. You're told what each is for, but the explanations are vague. This one for fever, that one for pain. Precision is not expected. Belief does some of the work. Superstition fills the gaps where knowledge thins. A groom ties a red thread around his wrist after being kicked, muttering about bad luck clinging to him. Someone burns a scrap of paper with protective characters written hastily before a long ride. Historians still argue how much faith people placed in these practices versus practical treatment, but here, the line is meaningless. You do what you can, and then you hope. A quirky tidbit you hear during a slow afternoon sticks with you. Some Han-era texts recommend using fermented animal dung as wound dressing, believed to draw out infection. Historians still argue whether this ever worked or simply caused more problems, and you are deeply grateful that no one suggests it today. That's joke number 1 for this section, delivered entirely in your head. Injuries are treated with urgency only when they threaten function. A deep cut that limits grip matters. A fever that slows movement matters. A chronic ache does not. You see people work through pain with practiced detachment, saving their reactions for when no one is watching. Endurance here is social currency. One night, a guard collapses onto a bench, dizzy and pale. The station pauses just enough to notice. Water is brought. Herbs are mixed. Someone presses 2 fingers to his wrist, counting silently. There's no panic, just procedure. Historians still argue how often minor illnesses turned fatal in such environments, but watching this, you understand how quickly the margin can vanish. The guard recovers by morning, weak but upright. The station exhales and moves on. No record is made beyond a brief note about reduced patrol hours. Health, like weather, is something you accommodate and then forget. You start to feel your own body differently. Every ache becomes a calculation. Can you work through it? Should you mention it? Attention can bring help, but it can also bring scrutiny. You joke to yourself, joke number 2, that self-diagnosis is the most advanced medical skill you'll develop here. As night falls, you notice charms tucked into door frames, scratches on beams meant to ward off sickness, whispered prayers barely audible over the sound of breathing. Medicine and magic share space easily when survival is the goal.
You lie down that night aware of how fragile everyone is, how much the station depends on bodies holding together just long enough. Sleep comes with a faint anxiety, not of dying, but of becoming a problem. In a place built for motion, stillness is the real threat. You learn the rules long before anyone explains them, because explanation is a luxury reserved for those with power. The rest of you absorb law the way stone absorbs rain, slowly, inevitably, and without choice. Every action here has a shadow consequence, and most of them don't land on you alone. The station runs on collective responsibility. That's not metaphorical, it's legal. A mainstream historical fact settles into your understanding as you watch a clerk review yesterday's records. Under Han law, many offenses were punished by grouping people together, holding supervisors and co-workers accountable for one person's failure. The logic is simple and ruthless. Fear shared is fear multiplied. You see it play out when a groom misjudges a horse's readiness. The animal returns limping, nothing catastrophic, but enough to trigger questions. The groom is questioned first, then his supervisor, then the clerk who signed off on the rotation. No one raises their voice. That would be unnecessary. The silence does the work. Historians still argue whether this atmosphere crushed initiative. You notice people hesitating before acting, weighing risk against necessity. Yet the station continues to function, slowly, carefully, but effectively. The rules don't inspire excellence, they enforce adequacy. At night, lying on your mat, you think about how the law feels here, not distant or abstract, but close enough to breathe on your neck. You understand now that the station doesn't need constant enforcement. It has already trained you to police yourself. By morning, the lesson has settled. You move with more caution, more awareness of how your actions intersect with others. The rules have done their work. You are part of the net now, holding others up as it holds you in place. Night duty stretches time in strange ways. Hours feel thick, sticky, like honey pulled too slowly from a jar. You take your turn on watch again, spear in hand, eyes scanning a yard you've memorized by now. Darkness flattens detail. Everything becomes silhouette and sound. To stay awake, people talk, quietly, in fragments, so words don't drift too far. This is when stories surface. Half-remembered history, rumor, superstition. Someone swears this road was built over an older one, dating back to a forgotten kingdom. A mainstream historical fact weaves into the murmur. Many Han roads did follow earlier routes, layering imperial ambition over ancient paths. You imagine the ground beneath you holding more footsteps than anyone can count. Ghost stories are inevitable. A groom mentions a station where a courier vanished, his horse returning alone at dawn. Another claims to have heard bells ringing with no rider in sight. Historians still argue whether such tales reflect real dangers or simply the human need to explain absence. But in the dark, the distinction blurs. You contribute a light joke, number 1 for this section, about how if a ghost can deliver mail faster, the Empire would promote it immediately. A few suppressed laughs ripple through the shadows. Humor keeps fear from settling too deep. Whispered stories also carry unofficial history. Someone talks about a rebellion years back when stations were burned and workers scattered. Another mentions a famous general who once passed through here, impatient, brilliant, terrifying. These narratives stitch the station into a larger past, reminding you that this place has been important before and will be again. The night sharpens senses. You hear a horse shift and know which one it is. You smell rain before clouds appear. You learn to read the difference between a person approaching and an animal. Historians still argue how much such vigilance affected workers long term, but right now it feels necessary. Alertness is survival. During the deepest part of the night, conversation thins. People retreat into their own thoughts. You stand with the spear balanced just so, feeling its weight. Joke number 2 floats through your head. This is the quietest social gathering you've ever attended, and you're not allowed to leave early. A sudden sound, a thump beyond the wall, freezes everyone. Hands tighten, breath holds. Seconds stretch. Then a low curse as someone identifies it, a fallen branch. Tension dissolves slowly. No one apologizes. This is normal. As the sky lightens almost imperceptibly, talk resumes, softer now, edged with relief. Dawn is coming. The ghosts retreat. History settles back into the ground. When you're finally relieved, you return the spear and step inside, eyelids heavy. The stories linger, though, echoing behind your eyes. They're not just entertainment. They're a way of claiming meaning in a system that rarely offers it. You lie down as morning creeps closer, comforted by the thought that even here, in the machinery of empire, people still trade stories to feel less alone. Sleep finds you with echoes of whispered history and the soft certainty that night will come again. By now, you've learned that the station's order is real, but never complete. Beneath it runs a quieter current of bending rules, smoothing edges, and surviving anyway. Corruption isn't announced here, it's practiced softly, like a second language you pick up by listening rather than speaking. It starts small. An extra scoop of grain diverted before tally, a worn horse logged as fitter than it is, just long enough to get through the week. A courier allowed to rest an extra few minutes because he slipped a bundle of dried meat into the right hands. None of this feels dramatic, it feels practical. A mainstream historical fact settles uncomfortably into place. Despite strict legal codes, Han administrative systems relied heavily on human judgment, which created constant opportunities for minor corruption. You notice how these acts are rarely individual. Someone doesn't steal alone. They involve others, spreading both benefit and risk. Collective responsibility cuts both ways. If everyone shares a secret, everyone is invested in keeping it quiet. Historians still argue whether such small-scale corruption undermined the empire or actually stabilized it by absorbing pressure. Standing here, you suspect it does both at once. There are tiny rebellions, too, so small they barely deserve the name. A clerk delays a report by a few hours to protect a coworker. A guard fails to notice a shortcut a local uses through the yard. These are not acts of defiance against the emperor, they're acts of loyalty to the people standing next to you. You're careful not to step too far into this current. Newcomers who try to exploit it openly don't last. The station tolerates bending, not breaking. Joke number 1 for this section flickers through your thoughts. The fastest way to get caught here is to think you're cleverer than the system. You keep that wisdom internal. A quirky tidbit you overhear when evening sticks with you. Some postal workers supposedly developed coded marks, extra scratches or dots on official tallies to signal trouble to the next station without alerting inspectors. Historians still argue whether this actually happened or is a later romantic invention, but the idea feels plausible in a place where communication is both everything and dangerous. You see how corruption mirrors hierarchy. Those higher up bend rules with fewer consequences. Those lower down take greater risks for smaller gains. It breeds quiet resentment, but also resignation. Complaining would only expose everyone. One night, you're offered a share in a minor scheme. Nothing illegal on paper, just generous interpretation. You hesitate, feeling the weight of choice. Accepting binds you closer to this place. Refusing marks you as unpredictable. You accept quietly. The reward is trivial. The belonging is not. Joke number 2 surfaces later as you lie awake. Congratulations, you've unlocked the secret level where survival comes with moral footnotes. You smile faintly in the dark. By morning, the station looks the same as ever. Nothing visible has changed. That's the point. Corruption here doesn't announce itself with chaos, it hides inside routine, keeping things moving when strict order would snap. You realize then that the Empire's strength is not its purity, but its tolerance for controlled imperfection. The station survives because people allow themselves just enough flexibility to remain human. And now, so do you. Belief moves through the station in quiet gestures rather than grand ceremony. You don't see priests arrive in robes or hear bells rung for ritual hours. Instead, religion here is folded into routine, stitched between tasks like a hidden seam. You notice it most when things feel uncertain. The small shrine in the yard gets more attention now. Not crowds, just individuals pausing for a heartbeat longer than necessary. A hand brushes the wooden tablet. A coin is placed, then quickly removed, replaced with a pebble. A mainstream historical fact settles into focus. During the Han Dynasty, popular religious practice blended state ritual, ancestor veneration, and local folk beliefs, often without clear boundaries. Official ideology might speak of heaven's mandate, but daily life ran on smaller hopes. Before a difficult ride, a courier mutters a few words you can't quite hear, pressing his forehead briefly to the horse's neck. Before a storm, someone burns incense near the kitchen door. None of this is mandated. It persists because it feels useful. Historians still argue whether such practices genuinely shaped decision-making or merely comforted those with no control. But from inside the station, comfort alone seems reason enough. Luck is treated like a resource, limited, fickle, to be conserved. Certain horses are considered unlucky, though no one writes it down. Certain days are avoided for long runs if possible. You catch yourself starting to participate, stepping around a crack in the yard because someone once mentioned it was bad fortune. Joke number 1 for this section flits through your mind. Congratulations, you're now superstitious. Please collect your complimentary anxiety. A quirky tidbit circulates during an evening lull. Some Han texts describe officials casting lots or interpreting cracks in heated bones to decide travel timing. Historians still argue how often such divination influenced practical logistics, but even here, you see people glance at the sky, the wind, the birds, reading signs, whether they admit it or not. Ritual also intersects with fear. When illness lingers or a courier is late, small offerings multiply. Threads appear tied to door handles. Chalk marks show up on beams. No one comments. To comment would be to challenge their effectiveness, and no one wants to be responsible for testing fate. You feel a subtle tension between official rationality and lived belief. The station's paperwork demands precision, accountability, cause and effect. Belief allows for ambiguity. It gives people a way to act when no correct action exists. Historians still argue whether the Han state tolerated such beliefs as harmless or encouraged them as social glue. Standing here, you suspect tolerance was enough. Late one night, during watch, you stand near the shrine longer than you mean to. You don't pray exactly, you just stand, breathing, listening to the night insects, feeling the ground steady beneath your feet. In a life governed by schedules and tallies, this moment feels like a loophole. You joke quietly to yourself, joke number 2, that if luck really listens, it must be exhausted by now. The thought makes you smile, which feels like its own small ritual. By morning, offerings have been cleared away, tucked into corners, or dissolved by weather. The shrine looks as it always does, modest, patient. Belief here doesn't demand permanence, it survives on repetition. You step back into work carrying a sense that the station runs not just on rules and routines, but on the hope that someone or something might occasionally tip the balance in your favor. And when you have so little control, that hope is powerful enough to keep you going. The crisis doesn't announce itself with drama. It arrives the way most real disasters do, quietly, sideways, disguised as inconvenience. A courier is expected by mid-morning. By noon, there's still no sign. By early afternoon, the station's mood has shifted from casual concern to something tighter, more brittle. You feel it in the way the clerk checks the road one extra time, in how grooms pause mid-task to listen. Delays happen, you've seen them, but this one stretches oddly, tugging at everyone's nerves. A mainstream historical fact presses in here. Postal delays during the Han Dynasty could have serious consequences, especially during military campaigns or tax collection cycles, where timing was everything. By late afternoon, the station master calls a quiet meeting. No shouting, no panic, just a recalibration. Extra guards at the gate, horses prepped in case of sudden departure. You're assigned to help ready supplies, hands moving faster than your thoughts. This is what preparedness looks like, controlled motion layered over uncertainty. Speculation blooms despite everyone's efforts to contain it. Bandits? Injury? Wrong road? Historians still argue how often couriers vanished outright versus being delayed by mundane obstacles, but the imagination fills gaps eagerly. Someone mutters about last night's fog. Someone else mentions unrest 2 stations down. Fear finds plenty of hooks. A quirky tidbit surfaces in the tension. Some records suggest couriers occasionally abandoned routes to avoid carrying dangerous messages, choosing punishment over certain death. Historians still argue how credible these accounts are, but the idea hangs heavy in the air. You glance at the road and imagine the weight of a message worth dying or refusing to deliver. As dusk approaches, a decision is made. A search rider will be sent. That means using resources, risking more delay, and potentially making things worse. It's a gamble layered atop another gamble. The station master weighs it carefully, then nods. You help saddle a horse, hands steady despite the knot in your stomach. This is when the rules start to blur. Officially, you wait for instructions from above. Practically, you act before waiting becomes negligence. Historians still argue where initiative ended and insubordination began in such moments, but inside the crisis, those lines feel theoretical. The search rider leaves, disappearing into the dim road. The station settles into an uneasy vigil. Lanterns are lit early. Supper is eaten without appetite. You crack a weak joke, number 1 for this section, about how this is exactly when the Empire decides to test your patience. It lands flat. Fair enough. Hours drag. Then, finally, movement at the gate. 2 figures emerge from the dark, the missing courier and the search rider, riding hard together. Relief hits like a wave, almost dizzying. The courier is shaken but intact. A fallen bridge, a forced detour, nothing more dramatic than bad infrastructure and worse luck. The station exhales all at once. Procedures snap back into place. Times are recorded, explanations noted. The message continues on its way, only bruised by delay. Joke number 2 surfaces quietly, defeated once again by a road in need of maintenance. Later, as night settles, you feel the aftershock. Crisis reveals fault lines. Who decides? Who hesitates? Who steps forward? You understand now that the station survives not because crises never happen, but because when they do, people move anyway, imperfectly, together. You lie down that night with your pulse finally slowing, aware that tomorrow the road will look the same, and yet something has shifted. You've seen how close routine always is to collapse, and how quickly it's stitched back together. The morning after the crisis feels unnaturally ordinary. The sun rises on schedule, horses are fed, tallies are made. If you hadn't lived through the tension of the previous night, you might never guess how close the station came to unraveling. This is how consequence works here, not as spectacle, but as paperwork. The clerk sits longer over the registers than usual, brush moving slowly, deliberately. Reports must be written, phrased carefully, aligned with expectation. A mainstream historical fact asserts itself quietly. Han officials relied on written reports to reconstruct events they never witnessed, meaning outcomes often depended as much on wording as reality. You watch language become a shield. Explanations are chosen, not invented, but shaped. The fallen bridge is mentioned. The weather is noted. The timing is contextualized. No blame is assigned outright. Historians still argue how much discretion local administrators had in framing such incidents, but from where you stand, it's clear that survival often depends on narrative competence. The station master reviews the draft, nodding once, then twice. Minor adjustments are made. A phrase softened. A delay framed as unavoidable rather than negligent. This isn't deception so much as translation, from lived chaos to bureaucratic calm. You understand now that truth here is expected to arrive in an acceptable form. Punishment, if it comes, is subtle. The courier is reassigned to lighter duty for a few days, officially to recover. Unofficially, it marks the event. The guard who suggested the search rider earns a nod of approval, nothing more. Initiative is recognized quietly so it doesn't become precedent. Collective responsibility hums in the background. Everyone knows that if the report had gone poorly, consequences would have spread wide. The relief you feel isn't just personal, it's communal. Joke number 1 for this section surfaces in your mind. The real emergency wasn't the delay, it was the write-up. Historians still argue whether such systems discouraged honesty. You see instead a different tension, honesty filtered through fear. People don't lie because they're dishonest, they shape truth because they want to keep functioning. By midday, the station has moved on. New mail arrives, new horses run. The crisis is absorbed, leaving only faint ripples in behavior. You notice people double-checking bridges mentioned in passing. You notice a little more caution, a little less chatter. A quirky tidbit you hear during lunch lingers. Some Han officials reportedly kept copies of reports they'd submitted, comparing them later with outcomes to learn how far truth could bend without breaking. Historians still argue whether this reflects cynicism or pragmatism, but it feels very human. That afternoon, you're tasked with a small but telling job, escorting a departing report to the next station. Not riding, just walking it to the gate, handing it over properly. The paper feels heavier than it should. This thin bundle carries the station's future, condensed into careful characters. As you pass it on, you feel a strange pride, not in heroism, but in continuity. The system held. You held. The road remains open. That night, lying on your mat, you think about how judgment here is rarely dramatic. It seeps in through reassignment, reputation, future trust. Consequence is not a hammer, it's erosion. Sleep comes with the understanding that you are now part of the station's history, however minor. Your actions have been folded into record and memory, smoothed into acceptable shapes. Tomorrow, no one will mention the crisis, but the station will remember, and so will you.
Departure doesn't come with ceremony. There's no bell rung for you, no mark added to a ledger that anyone will reread. You simply wake knowing this is your last morning here, the knowledge settling into you as quietly as dust. The station moves around you, unchanged, indifferent in the way only systems can be. You pack what little you have. The straw mat bears the shape of your body one last time before someone else claims it. Outside, the yard looks smaller than it did when you arrived, or maybe you've just learned its limits too well. Horses are already being readied. A courier argues softly with a groom about readiness. Life continues without pausing to notice you're leaving. A mainstream historical fact lingers as you take it all in. Most people who served in Han postal stations did so temporarily, rotated, reassigned, or replaced. Their labor essential, but their identities interchangeable. You feel the truth of that now. You mattered here, but not uniquely. The station does not grieve turnover, it requires it. You walk the familiar paths one last time, feeling each texture underfoot. The well where you hauled water. The administrative doorway you learned to respect. The shrine, still modest, still patient. You pause there, not out of obligation, but habit. Historians still argue whether repeated ritual creates belief or merely routine, but in this moment, the distinction doesn't matter. People nod as you pass, no speeches. A guard gives you a brief clasp on the shoulder, already looking past you toward the gate. Someone cracks a final light joke, joke number 1 for this section, about how you'll miss the food most of all. You almost laugh, because part of you will. At the gate, you turn back once. The station breathes, steady and unbothered. You realize that what stays with you isn't the work or the rules, but the sounds, the bells, the hooves, the quiet murmur of people staying awake together through the night. You've been tuned to its frequency, and leaving feels like stepping out of a current. As you walk away, the road opens, wide and pale. The empire stretches in both directions, and for the first time, you are not required to keep it moving. Joke number 2 surfaces gently. Congratulations, you've completed your shift. No feedback form required. The station recedes behind you, swallowed by distance and dust. But it doesn't vanish. It lingers in your muscles, in the way you measure time now, in how you listen for things that aren't there anymore. Historians still argue how such systems shaped the people who passed through them, but you don't need a debate. You feel it. You slow your pace as the day warms, letting the tension ease from your shoulders. The road hums softly beneath your feet. Somewhere behind you, another courier arrives. Another tally is made. Another small life bends to keep the empire whole. And you carry on, lighter now, carrying nothing but memory. The road stretches gently ahead, empty and calm. No hooves pounding, no bells demanding urgency. Your breathing slows, matching your steps, then drifting free of them. The sounds of the station fade into something softer, almost like wind moving through grass. You're no longer counting hours or watching shadows. There's nothing to prepare for, nothing to record, just the steady feeling of having been somewhere demanding and having left it behind. Your thoughts loosen, the images blur at the edges. The empire, the station, the road itself all soften into distant shapes, safe to let go of. You rest in that quiet space where no one needs anything from you. Sleep comes gently now, without bells, without duty, without fear.